You have been told the Black Death came from rats, killed half of Europe, and plunged the world into chaos. And here is the thing, most of that is actually true, but the latest research shows the real story is far more complex, far more fascinating, and way more unsettling than any history textbook ever told you. In the next several minutes, we are diving into three massive myths about the deadliest pandemic in human history. First, rats brought the plague, but why did it spread so insanely fast? Second, which well-meaning cures actually made everything worse? And third, the surprising aftermath that still shapes our world today. Stick around. This gets dark. Let us start with the biggest question. How did the Black Death travel 1,300 kilometers in just 4 years? From Sicily to Norway, through mountains, across seas, and into every corner of Europe. The story you learned? Rats carried infected fleas. Fleas bit humans. And just like that, the plague took hold. That is not entirely wrong. But here is the problem. Rats do not travel fast. A rat colony typically expands only about 200 meters per year. So how did the plague move like wildfire? Enter Yersinia pestis, the bacteria behind the nightmare. It causes 3 forms of plague: bubonic, which gives you those infamous swellings; pneumonic, which attacks your lungs and spreads through coughing; and septicemic, which infects your blood and kills you in hours. The traditional theory suggests a rat dies, the flea jumps to a human, and the human gets sick. But in 2018, researchers at the University of Oslo ran the numbers. They modeled how fast the plague actually spread through medieval cities. And rat fleas alone? They could not explain it. Their conclusion? Human fleas and body lice were the real accelerators. In crowded cities with people living on top of each other and wearing the same clothes for weeks, we spread the plague ourselves, through our parasites, our filth, our own bodies. Here is the nuance. In rural areas, rat fleas mattered. That was a slow and steady transmission. But in dense cities, human ectoparasites turned the plague into a turbocharged killer. Both pathways played a role depending on where you were and what time of year it was. And here is the kicker. The rats were not the main culprit in the urban nightmare. We were. Our overcrowded homes, our lice-infested clothes, our inability to understand what was killing us. The rats were accomplices, but we were the primary vectors. All right, so the plague is ripping through Europe. What hours that did people do? Unfortunately, almost everything they tried was wrong. Medieval doctors believed in miasma theory, the idea that disease came from bad air. So they created those iconic plague masks stuffed with herbs and flowers. Did it help? Psychologically, maybe. Medically? Absolutely not. But here is where it gets brutal. The standard treatment for plague was bloodletting. Doctors would drain 500 milliliters of blood from patients already weakened by fever and infection. Imagine having the flu or a severe infection, and your doctor's solution is to remove a pint of your blood. That is what they did, repeatedly. Then there was Theriac, the supposed wonder drug. It was a concoction of 64 or more ingredients, including opium, snake flesh, and crushed gemstones. It cost a fortune. It eased pain, sure, but it cured nothing. Other remedies included strapping live chickens to the swellings to draw out the poison. People drank urine. They wore arsenic amulets. Some even sat in sewers because they thought if bad air caused the plague, then the worst possible air might somehow inoculate them. The irony? The one thing that actually worked was quarantine. Venice implemented it in 1348. Milan closed its gates and enforced strict isolation. These cities had significantly lower death rates. The knowledge was there, but fear, superstition, and bad science drowned it out. And then there were the Flagellants. Over 200,000 people wandered through Europe, whipping themselves bloody to atone for humanity's sins. Their logic was that God sent the plague as punishment, and public penance would appease him. What hours that actually happened? Massive superspreader events. Crowds gathering, sharing food, and sleeping in close quarters. The Flagellants did not stop the plague. They accelerated it. But the darkest chapter involves the search for scapegoats. Across Europe, certain communities were accused of poisoning wells. Never mind that everyone was dying from the plague. Fear needed someone to blame. In Strasbourg, 2,000 people were burned alive. In Mainz, 6,000 were killed. The list goes on. The cruel irony is that some of these communities often had lower mortality rates because religious laws mandated ritual washing and hygiene practices that accidentally reduced transmission. So, communities that were surviving better became targets. Their survival was seen as proof of guilt. The violence did not just kill thousands, it destabilized cities, destroyed skilled populations, including physicians, and tore apart the very communities that needed to work together. The plague killed millions, but fear, ignorance, and hatred killed on top of that. So, did medieval society collapse? History books love that narrative. Total chaos and anarchy. But the reality is that the church kept running, monarchies survived, trade routes stayed open, but on the local level there was massive upheaval. We can see 4 changes that still echo today. First, the labor shortage led to a social revolution. Imagine half your coworkers vanish overnight. Suddenly you can negotiate. Peasants who survived demanded higher wages, better conditions, and land rights. In some regions, wages doubled. Across Western Europe, the system of serfdom began to crumble. By 1500, it was mostly gone. The plague did not just kill, it broke the feudal system. Second, the role of women changed. For a brief window from 1350 to 1400, opportunity expanded. With fewer men, women stepped into new roles as brewers, merchants, and property owners. However, by the 1400s, there was a backlash. Guilds excluded women and the era of witch hunts began. It is a classic example of how crises can open doors, but they do not guarantee they stay open. Third, medicine saw progress born from desperation. The church, desperate for answers, allowed something previously forbidden: autopsies. Physicians could finally look inside bodies, study anatomy, and understand disease. This laid the groundwork for modern anatomy and the scientific revolution. The plague did not cure itself, but it forced humanity to rethink everything. Fourth, the economic reality changed for the survivors. Fewer people meant more resources for those left behind. Meat consumption in England doubled. More capital meant more investment, leading into the Renaissance and the invention of the printing press. The survivors lived materially better lives, but they lived on mountains of corpses. So, yes, the Black Death brought progress in the form of higher wages, medical innovation, and economic growth. But can we really call it progress when 75 million people had to die for it? That is the question history textbooks skip. Societies can learn from catastrophes, but the price is always higher than we want to admit. And here is the thing that should really keep you up at night: we have not learned as much as we think. Let us recap. The plague was more complex than the rat story. It was accelerated by human error, and the aftermath was a mix of progress and tragedy. Modern global events have shown us that misinformation, scapegoating, and ineffective treatments still surface when fear takes over. We have better technology, but the same human reflexes. If this complexity fascinated you, consider following for more deep dives into history. Next time, we will explore why certain historical persecutions actually exploded during the supposedly enlightened periods rather than the Middle Ages. What hours at historical event do you think deserves a more complex story? Drop a comment below. Because the real lesson of the Black Death is not about rats or bacteria. It is about us, how we respond to fear, how we treat each other when everything falls apart, and whether we will do better next time.